At 9:40 p.m. on February 15, 1898, second-class boatswain's mate John Hood stood watch on the forward deck of the USS Maine, anchored 500 yards from the Havana waterfront. The harbor water was calm, the night air humid, carrying smells of tobacco and salt. Behind him, 266 American sailors settled into their evening routines below deck. Most were asleep in their hammocks, some wrote letters home, others played cards in the cramped crew quarters. Hood noticed nothing unusual, no approaching boats, no sounds beyond the normal creaks and groans of a steel warship at rest. At 9:40 and 6 seconds, the forward magazines detonated. The explosion tore through the bow with a force that lifted the entire forward third of the ship. 5 tons of gunpowder ignited in an instant. The blast wave traveled through steel bulkheads at 13,000 feet per second. Sailors in the forward compartments had no time to react. No warning. The superstructure collapsed inward. The foremast snapped at its base and crashed into the water. A column of fire shot 200 feet into the night sky, illuminating Havana's colonial architecture in flickering orange light. Hood was thrown backward by the concussion. His ears rang. He couldn't hear his own screaming. The Maine lurched violently forward, then began settling by the bow. Water rushed through the torn hull plating. Within seconds, the forward third of the ship was completely submerged. The mainmast tilted at a 30-degree angle. Sailors trapped below deck pounded on hatches that wouldn't open. The water was already over their heads. Captain Charles Sigsbee was in his cabin writing a letter to his wife when the deck beneath him erupted. The oil lamp on his desk shattered. Furniture slid across the tilting floor. He grabbed the doorframe and made his way topside. The scene stopped him cold. His ship was dying. The bow had vanished beneath black water. Flames consumed what remained of the forward superstructure. Bodies floated in the debris field. Men screamed for help in the darkness. Sigsbee began giving orders. His voice was steady despite what he was witnessing. Get the wounded off, launch the boats, account for survivors. The crew responded with discipline that bordered on the mechanical. They moved through practiced emergency procedures even as their world came apart. The Spanish cruiser Alfonso Thuth, anchored nearby, immediately launched rescue boats. Spanish sailors pulled American survivors from the water. They administered first aid on their own decks. They wrapped the injured in blankets. This detail would be largely forgotten in the weeks to come. By 10:15 p.m., the Maine had settled into the harbor mud. Only the aft third remained above water. The explosion had killed 266 men. Most died instantly in the initial blast. Others drowned in flooded compartments. A few burned to death trapped in the wreckage. 89 survivors huddled on the Spanish rescue vessels, many severely injured. Captain Sigsbee was among the last to leave his ship. He stood on the deck of a rescue boat and watched the Maine's silhouette against the harbor lights. 28 years of naval service, he had never lost a command, never imagined losing one like this. The Maine was not supposed to be a combat deployment. She had arrived in Havana 3 weeks earlier on January 25, 1898. The official mission was described as a friendly visit to protect American interests during Cuba's ongoing rebellion against Spanish colonial rule. In reality, she was a show of force. A 6,682-ton second-class battleship anchored in a Spanish harbor sent a clear message about American power and American attention to Cuban affairs. The ship herself represented America's growing naval ambitions. Commissioned in 1895, she was 319 feet long with a beam of 57 feet. Twin reciprocating steam engines produced 9,293 horsepower, top speed 17 knots. Armament included 4 10-inch guns, 6 6-inch guns, and 7 6-pounder rapid-fire guns. The crew of 355 officers and enlisted men maintained constant readiness despite the diplomatic nature of their presence. Sigsbee had operated under strict orders. No provocations, no incidents, maintain cordial relations with Spanish authorities. He had followed those orders perfectly. His crew had been model guests. They stayed aboard ship, avoided conflicts, conducted themselves with professional restraint. None of it mattered now. By midnight, telegraph cables carried news of the disaster to Washington. Navy Secretary John Long received the first reports at 1 a.m. on February 16th. He immediately informed President William McKinley. The president's response was measured. Wait for facts. Don't jump to conclusions. Form an official inquiry board. The American public had no such restraint. William Randolph Hearst's New York Journal hit the streets on February 16th with a headline in 4-inch type, "Destruction of the Warship. Maine was the work of an enemy." Joseph Pulitzer's New York World matched the intensity. Maine explosion caused by bomb or torpedo. Neither publication had any evidence. Both sold hundreds of thousands of extra copies. The phrase "Remember the Maine" appeared in print within 48 hours. It would become the rallying cry of a nation moving toward war. The Navy convened a court of inquiry on February 21st. Captain William Sampson led the investigation. The board examined physical evidence, interviewed survivors, consulted technical experts, and dove on the wreck multiple times. The forward magazines had definitely exploded. That much was certain. The question was what triggered the detonation. The board faced two primary theories: external explosion, a mine or torpedo placed beneath the hull, or internal explosion, spontaneous combustion in a coal bunker adjacent to the magazines. Each had supporting evidence, each had significant problems. The external explosion theory relied on witness accounts. Several survivors reported feeling two distinct blasts. A smaller initial explosion followed immediately by the massive magazine detonation. This sequence matched what would happen if an external charge breached the hull near the magazines. The Maine's hull plating was only 1 inch thick below the waterline. A mine containing 50 to 75 pounds of gunpowder could easily penetrate. But no one had seen a mine. No boats approached the ship before the explosion. Spanish authorities denied any involvement and seemed genuinely shocked by the disaster. They had no obvious motive. Relations between Spain and the United States were tense, but not openly hostile. Destroying an American battleship would guarantee war, a war Spain knew it would lose. The internal explosion theory focused on the coal bunkers. The Maine used bituminous coal that was known to spontaneously combust when improperly stored. Heat builds up in coal piles through slow oxidation. If temperatures reach critical levels, ignition occurs. This had happened on other ships. The bunker adjacent to the forward magazines had recorded elevated temperatures in the days before the explosion. The ship's coal passers had noted the heat during their shifts, but spontaneous combustion typically gives warning signs: smoke, smell, gradual temperature increase. The Maine showed none of these indicators. The explosion was sudden and catastrophic. No intermediate stages. The Court of Inquiry released its findings on March 28, 1898. Their conclusion: the Maine was destroyed by an external explosion from a submarine mine. The detonation occurred beneath the ship near the forward magazines. The resulting explosion of ammunition caused the total destruction of the forward third of the vessel. The report stopped short of assigning blame. It did not accuse Spain directly, but the implication was clear. The mine did not place itself. Someone wanted the Maine destroyed. American public opinion hardened immediately. War sentiment that had been building for months reached critical mass. "Remember the Maine," "To hell with Spain," became the chant at political rallies. Newspapers printed illustrations of sinister Spanish sailors planting mines. Congress debated intervention in Cuba with new urgency. President McKinley tried to slow the momentum. He was not eager for war. He understood the cost in American lives and treasury. He pushed for diplomatic solutions. Spain offered concessions. They agreed to grant Cuba limited autonomy. They suspended harsh policies against Cuban rebels. It wasn't enough. The pressure became overwhelming. On April 11th, McKinley asked Congress for authority to use military force in Cuba. On April 25th, Congress declared that a state of war had existed since April 21st. The Spanish-American War had begun. The conflict lasted 10 weeks. American forces won decisive victories in Cuba and the Philippines. Spain's colonial empire collapsed. The war cost approximately 2,446 American lives, though only 385 died in combat. The rest succumbed to disease, primarily yellow fever and malaria. The Maine herself remained in Havana Harbor, a twisted monument to the 266 men who died aboard her. She sat in the mud for 14 years. In 1911, the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers built a cofferdam around the wreck and pumped out the water. They recovered human remains and personal effects. They examined the damaged hull plating in detail. On March 16, 1912, the Maine was refloated, towed out to sea, and scuttled with full military honors. She sank in 600 fathoms, 3 miles off the Cuban coast. A permanent memorial was built in Havana using her foremast and other salvaged components. But the question of what caused the explosion persisted. In 1976, Admiral Hyman Rickover conducted a new investigation using modern engineering analysis. His team examined photographs of the wreck and applied knowledge of metallurgy and explosive effects. Their conclusion contradicted the 1898 finding. The hull plating was bent inward, not outward. The damage pattern was inconsistent with an external mine. Rickover's team determined that spontaneous coal combustion was the most likely cause. In 1998, National Geographic commissioned another study using computer modeling and advanced forensic techniques. This investigation reached a different conclusion. The evidence suggested an external explosion remained possible. The hull damage could be interpreted multiple ways. The mystery remained unresolved. The truth is, we may never know with certainty what destroyed the Maine. The physical evidence was compromised by salvage operations, corrosion, and the passage of time. Eyewitness accounts are contradictory. Technical analysis depends on assumptions that cannot be verified. Was it a Spanish mine, an accident? Sabotage by Cuban rebels trying to draw America into their war? Simple mechanical failure? What we know for certain is that 266 American sailors died on February 15, 1898. Most were young men, teenagers serving their first deployments. They enlisted for adventure, for escape, for the steady pay of naval service. They expected to go home after their tour ended. They wrote letters to mothers and sweethearts. They complained about the food and the heat. They did their duty aboard a ship sent to a harbor that didn't want them. They deserved better than to become a rallying cry for a war that might not have needed fighting. They deserved investigation over assumption, deliberation over hysteria. Their deaths deserved truth, not propaganda. The Maine's explosion changed American history. It propelled the United States onto the world stage as an imperial power. It acquired territory in the Caribbean and Pacific. It established patterns of intervention in Latin America that would persist for a century. All from an incident that remains fundamentally unexplained. Captain Sigsbee never commanded another ship. He spent the rest of his career testifying about that night, defending his crew, insisting he maintained proper safety protocols. He retired as a rear admiral in 1907 and died in 1923. He never stopped wondering if he could have prevented it. The last survivor of the Maine, Antonio de Sostoa, died in 1952 at age 71. He was a cook's assistant, 17 years old on the night of the explosion. He survived because he was on deck when the magazines detonated. He spent the rest of his life attending memorial services and answering questions from historians. He always said the same thing: it happened too fast to understand. One moment everything was normal. The next, the world was fire and water and screaming. The Maine rests now in the deep Atlantic. Her hull collapsed by pressure. Her steel corroding slowly into the sea floor. The 260 men who went down with her remain entombed in her compartments. The Navy never attempted to recover all the bodies. Some things should stay buried. But the question remains, what really happened at 9:40 p.m. on February 15, 1898? Was it war crime or accident? Sabotage or mechanical failure? We have theories. We have evidence pointing in multiple directions. We have conclusions reached by different investigators using different methods. We don't have certainty, we never will. And that might be the Maine's final legacy. Not as proof of Spanish aggression or American righteousness, but as a reminder that the events that change history are often the ones we understand least. That certainty can be manufactured, that sometimes we go to war because we need answers more than we need truth. 266 men died that night. Remember them for who they were, not what they became. Sailors serving their country, sons and brothers and fathers, human beings who deserved to go home. Remember the Maine, but remember it accurately.